Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Carryann Williams, and this is a talk show that's about all things related to mental wellness in the Black community. So if any of you have questions or comments, just drop a comment here on our Facebook live stream, and we will be able to get to any questions that you have. And so here I am on Facebook Live, and I'm here with my co-host today, Miss Deborah Jackson.
Hello, hello, hello.
So I'll have Deborah kind of introduce herself. I know she's been on the show before.
Thanks, Dr. Carryann. My name is Deborah Jackson. I have an LICSW. I work with Dr. Carryann at Justice Resource Institute. I'm in the training department as the clinical training and development specialist. In addition to my work there, I also have a coaching business called Deliberately Daring Coaching and Consultation. You can find us online at www.deliberatelydaring.com. And it's really about helping people find their authenticity and be effective in their lives. I think we all have a lot of expectations and things that can be weighing on us and keeping us from really enjoying our lives. And so coaching can be just a great way to work with people who are not having mental health issues. They just want to improve quality of life. I think it's really important to distinguish because I do wear both hats. And so I want to establish you can have a coach and a therapist. Don't expect your coach to be your therapist. Those are different roles.
Exactly. And I imagine that it would be great to have, I guess, if your therapist can also be your coach, that would be awesome, even though your coach cannot be your therapist necessarily.
Yeah,
unless they're a trained therapist and they want to be. But yeah. So they're two different roles.
Absolutely. And we don't want to get it murky. We don't want to have any sort of dual relationships. And so I think, it's really important to highlight that difference in that for some people, there's a comfort with one or the other, right? And so we can't not acknowledge that there is still stigma around mental health issues. And so for some people, there's that sense of like, I would be okay talking to a coach or I wouldn't be okay talking to a therapist. Or vice versa, it could be like, well, I really need insurance to cover this, so I'm going to go talk to a therapist as opposed to a coach because coaching isn't covered through therapy. And then really thinking about what is the expertise and the level that you want to deal with. So I think really important for people to know when you go to therapy, it is a very collaborative relationship. You are expecting your therapist to sort of be an expert, right? And so you're going to them and you're wanting them to give you feedback, advice, homework, tasks to complete on your healing journey. When you go and see a coach, you are really considered the expert. And so it's not somebody coming and saying like, so I'm going to need you to read this book and take this, do this and do that. It's more like, so let's talk about what's going to work for you. Let's talk about how we're going to help you reach your goals. So it's different spheres that I think are related, but we really want to highlight what sphere is someone operating in and what sphere am I expecting someone to operate in when I'm in relationship with them.
Nice. So Deliberately Daring Coaching and Consultation, you guys should check out her website.
Thank you.
And so you are still like accepting new clients and everything?
Yeah, so there's on the website, there's a nice little form that people can fill out. And what happens is it will come to me, we'll schedule like a discovery call just to be like, hey, what are you looking for? What are you hoping to get? Because that's a really great place for me to say, okay, I think I can really help you with this. Or actually, that's outside of my area of expertise, but here are people that I know that do this. Let me hook you up with them. Or, it sounds like maybe what you're looking for is therapy. Let's talk about how to help you find that. And then is this something that we can do in parallel or in conjunction? Because you can't have both at the same time. Yes, I do. Or is it we want to prioritize one over the other? And so really just making sure that it's a good fit, all of that. It's like a 20-minute conversation at no cost to the person to really decide if this is something that they want to invest in.
Right. Wow. So sounds like a good deal going there.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So now I bet that whether in therapy or in coaching, people will sometimes bring this experience to you of having gone through a microaggression. And so that's our topic today. We're talking about microaggressions. It's part 2, because even though we kind of talked about it a little bit before, there is still so much to say about microaggressions. And so we're going to be talking about that today. But Deb, do you want to just kind of review like the definition and the types of microaggressions?
Yeah, so we had talked before about it's this creating of an environment where people really feel demeaned, they feel invalidated. These are things that can be blatant, like people know that they're creating this hostile work environment, or it can be inadvertent, right? And so, really thinking about it as happening on three different levels. So, we have micro invalidations, micro insults, and micro assaults. And we did a little bit of a definition about what those are. But I think in general, what we want to think about is where there are these environments where someone who is in some sort of marginalized community, whatever that could be, whether that is based on race, on gender, on sexuality, on ability levels, around, a multitude of issues. It's an environment that is hostile to them. And I think it's really important that when we're talking about microaggressions, we highlight again, micro doesn't mean small. It means it's happening on the person to person level, right? And so we have like macro tools of like oppression, right? And so for me, the first thing that's coming to mind is the situation that's happening in Texas, where they are passing laws that are saying you cannot get medical care in terms of abortion. Like we are forbidding that for anybody after 6 weeks. And we have a system set in place where people can report you for doing this or facilitating someone doing this, and they could win up to $10,000. So we're bounty hunting people, right? But that's at a law level. That's a macro level system of oppression. When we're talking about micro, it is on that person to person or individual level. So we want to think about it as the person who does report it. Like, oh, so I don't appreciate the fact that you are pro-choice or that you were making this decision for yourself. So I'm going to report you, make your life more difficult, and then I'm going to get also money for it. Like, how does that make sense? But also thinking about all of the layers of oppression that is present in that and all of the ways that it can impact people. I think that when we talk about it as micro, sometimes people think small, and there are lots of small ones. And I think that we're going to talk about some of those things, right? Where it's a comment, it's a thing where we're just like, I feel uncomfortable, but it's like, well, you're sensitive, you misunderstood me, that wasn't what I meant, right? You're misunderstanding the situation, which you're then like, well, is it me? Like, no, these are deliberate systems that are put into place. Even if the person wasn't acting deliberately, we need to think about the organizational structure that allows someone to think that those types of comments or actions were okay.
Wow. Wow. But it kind of makes you think because we have I was kind of looking up some of these microaggressions, and there are some of them occur at a macro level. And I guess
Mm-hmm.
kind of what you mentioned, I think maybe the first example you mentioned is like the environmental
Yeah.
microaggression. So the example they give is like a college or university with buildings that are all named after white heterosexual upper class males, or overabundance of liquor stores in communities of color. It's kind of like this environmental, but they call it microaggression. I don't, it's an interesting kind of to use the word micro is kind of interesting in that situation, I think.
Yes, because for me, I feel like those are really like the implementations of some macro level things, right? But it's how it's affecting that person. So if we take the example of like the names on the buildings, right? Or even like take it out of college, right? Because not everybody even goes to college. Let's look at how many middle schools, elementary schools are named after white slaveholders. So, what is it like for you when you are going to Robert E. Lee Middle School, right? What is it like for you when you're going to Washington Elementary School and that you're learning this history of like, oh, this is this person that is in some cases revered, right? Like we should know them. They are memorialized on this building, but you are a Black, brown, indigenous person of color. What is it like for you to have that on your middle school graduation sheet, right? That I graduated from this place where these are people who really fought against me even having the ability to be educated.
Right.
And yet, right? And so it's one of those things where I think that, of course, when you're thinking about it on this level, you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredibly oppressive and harmful. And how are we not recognizing that? But you have people who want to sort of gaslight you, like, well, it's not that big of a deal. We can't just erase history.
It's
These
in the
didn't do
past.
important things. Yes, right? Like,
It's
let it
just a
go.
statistic.
Nobody was alive from back then. And it's really like, okay, but let's, if I was sort of putting the name of somebody who harmed your ancestors, would you want to go into that institution and be like, yes, let's learn, let's honor them for what they did do and not just focus on the negative, right? I think those are the things that we want to think about, but especially when we think about I'm not even going to necessarily go with environmental microaggressions, but I feel like the environmental racism, like why is it so prevalent that liquor stores are in Black and brown and indigenous and poor communities, right? So I can find liquor stores everywhere, but can I get fresh groceries? No, right? And then how does that impact all of these other systems and all of these other things, right? So I can go and I can drink, but I can't get fresh groceries. So now, how is that impacting my health? When especially we know that there are these health disparities that happen, like obesity, like diabetes, like hypertension in BIPOC communities. And there are all of these things that are facilitating negative health impacts, but not facilitating better health impacts, right? And so we want to think about like that was purposeful. So someone may think like, oh, I just chose to have my store there, or I just chose to put the methadone clinic there because that's where the buses are.
That's where the buses are. Or sometimes they'll just say, well, this we did a marketing survey of where to best place our stores, and we found that there's a higher demand in this particular geographical region, and that's kind of they explain it all these kind of very statistical terms. It's
Yes,
not
and it's
racist; it's just statistics.
and you want to go like, so what were you thinking at? What were the factors when you looked at those statistics? Because you and I know, like, we did the statistics class. There's all sorts of ways to futz with statistics, right? Like, we can do some manipulation on some things. And so we really want to be mindful about how those things are happening. And I think even more when we think about sort of broadening it to this sense of like how environmental microaggressions, environmental racism can impact people. I think about like what happened with Hurricane Ida and how it really impacted communities of color, right? It really impacted New Orleans. It really impacted areas of Mississippi. And we know that those are areas where a lot of poor, Black, Indigenous people of color live. And so they had to leave that area for safety if they could, or they're there and it's 90 plus degrees and they have no power. Why? Because all of the power in New Orleans is run through one company. So they have a monopoly. So there's no real incentive for them to be out there fixing things. Because why? Right? So why are you creating these environments where there's no choice? And what happens when we see even like when renewal comes through? That's gentrification, which is really colonization, which is really taking away access and resources to people. Where do we do this at? What are the areas? Who's most likely to get displaced? And then the idea, right? Well, we are raising the value of this community. We're raising the property taxes of this community. It's not our fault that you didn't buy housing when we're not looking at the legacy of who's getting bank loans, who's getting mortgage loans, who has the ability to have equity, who are we pricing out of the environment for what reasons, and what does all of that mean?
Right, right. So they'll say, "Oh, but it's increasing the value of your property, but it's also increasing the taxes, and all these other these other kind of issues." And it's
Absolutely.
we have to ask ourselves the question: what is the message that all of this sends about a person's worth, a person's
Mm,
value, and a person's place in society?
yes.
Yeah.
And so, thinking about all of the messages that we get, and this is something that I really love to talk about and to think about with people, is that like language matters. And so, when we think about all of the ways that we are taught of intelligence, of wisdom, of who has it, of who should we seek wisdom and knowledge from, of whose wisdom and knowledge do we respect, right? Do we value? And this inherent things that are going on. And so, there are some things that are very in your face, blatant, and then there are some things that are much more subtle but have impact for people. And so, one of the stories I talk about a lot in my training, because I think it so resonates, is the story of like black, particularly Black children, when they draw themselves, often don't draw themselves as they actually look. Why? Not because they don't know what they look like, but because there are all of these messages that we've heard about what's beauty, right? And so it's long hair, it's blue eyes, it's all of these things, right? And so as you're a kid and you're thinking, well, of course I'm beautiful. Mommy and daddy tell me I'm beautiful all of the time. I'm going to draw myself the way that I think beautiful looks, even if that doesn't look like me, right? And so what does that mean for yourself when you don't see in yourself the qualities that people have told you to aspire to, right? You want to be beautiful, you want to be smart, you want to be talented. Are you associated with those things, or are they other from you?
And it kind of reminds me of the doll test, really.
Yes.
Where it's like, well, which doll is beautiful? Which doll do you want to play with? Which doll do you look like? It's very interesting because there was a percentage of the Black kids who, when asked which doll looks like them, actually picked the doll that had the white characteristics. Um, but almost all of them wanted to play with the white doll. They didn't want to play with the black doll. I think a very small percentage wanted to play with the black doll. And it kind of reminds me, when you say that, it kind of reminds me of that. And just even just examples of like in class when the teacher teaches them how to draw, what do you teach them? You try,
Right.
you teach them to draw with particular characteristics in mind, and you draw hair like this, and it's always just easier to draw hair like that. um, and you're kind of taught that everything about you is more difficult. drawing
Absolutely.
drawing your characteristics is more difficult. um, you know the life that you live is more like everything. It's just easier to just kind of worship this other image of what society should be like. So
Absolutely. And right. And when you think about even like, do we have crayons or colored pencils or markers that represent our skin tone? Because I remember the I had the fancy 64 box of crayons. I was even better than 10 box. I had 64. But that thing in there that looked like my shade, right? So you had like the black, the burnt sienna, and like the something else, and you're just like, these are ugly. Like, of course, I don't want, these don't look like me, so I don't want that. And then, of course, you think about all of the ways. So it's like, I've got brown hair, brown hair, brown eyes, brown skin. I don't want everything to be brown. Or even just, I think about like drawing your house. How many of us drew like single family houses in elementary school as our house, when that might not have been what we lived in at all? But that was sort of like what we were taught, and this is how you draw. It's a square and a triangle on top with your like half moon circle in this on the side for your sun. Right. But all of these lessons and these messages that we get, that really impact and affect how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world, how we think about other people, but also how they're thinking about us.
yeah, yeah, wow. And all these messages from childhood onward, I think, then seep into us psychologically and
Mhm.
become part of our implicit bias system. And all of us are subject to that, no matter
Yes.
what race we are. And you know, it's influenced by what country we grew up with in, what state, what city, our parentage, what we learned in our home, the messages, both explicit and implicit, that our parents gave us about who's worthy in society, who's considered smart, who's considered funny and entertaining, who's
Yes.
good at sports, who's good at science, and who holds wealth, who's
Mhm.
rich, who's poor, who travels, who doesn't travel, who needs charity, and who doesn't need charity. Um, all these messages, both explicit and implicit, then go into the kind of things that people say offhand when they think they're not being rude or they think they're not being racist. They don't even realize it because it's just such a part of their world view. Um, One of the things that a lot of people talk about of varying races, probably except except for people who are white, is the question, where are you from and where are you really from?
Yes.
And I remember hearing somewhere that even um, even people who might be speaking with an American accent, if they're not white, they get that question more often. And sometimes it's not even about thinking you're not from the US. Sometimes it's just about, are you from this neighborhood? You
Hmm.
know? So,
Yep.
this idea of who are you and why are you here? How did you get here? I feel like, and I think there's some statistics to back this up, that people of color get that question more often. They get queried about, how did you make it into this circle? How did you make it to this status? Why are you living in this neighborhood? What's your story? Because it's kind of what, for whatever reason, people sometimes they have a higher level of curiosity when a non-white person is in certain spaces.
Absolutely. And I think, again, if we think about how we internalize some of those messages. So I remember being a child and getting some of those. And, I lived in a pretty multicultural environment, but it was heavy, like Black and Latino. And so there's like, you just Black? That's a thing. Are you just Black? And I remember that it was like, nobody wanted to be just Black. That was not like a thing that anybody aspired to. And so I remember like being very happy about like, no, I'm Black and Cape Verdean, because that was like more than, or like I got Indian in my family, or my people are from here, right? So there was this sort of status that happened, which like, why? Why is this a thing? And then I've shared, I live in Rhode Island. I grew up in Rhode Island. I left for school, but I've lived here predominantly for most of my life. And people will be like, oh, first they're like, there's Black people in Rhode Island. Yes, we exist. We're here. But then it's like, well, where did your family really come from? And not that people expect me to like know necessarily in Africa, but it's like, well, you must have come from down south. No, both sides of my family, for as long as I can go trace back, which is generations, lived here. Like that's what it was. And so it's like, no, we've always lived here. And it's like, wait, how did you get there? And then you want to say, like, slave ships came to Rhode Island too, right? They didn't just go to the south. We might have outlawed it a little quicker, but it was still there. But I think, back to that sense of not just where are you from, but also for all of the people who feel like here is not enough of an answer, or that I'm just Black, I don't know anything else, is not enough of an answer. It's like there has to be more, or more is better. Like you want to, that there's somehow some inherent worth in being able to like track some lineage from someplace else. And so if I can say that I come from this specific place, or I'm from that specific thing, or I'm not just this, that somehow makes it better. And so I think about the internalized racism that has happened for that, for so many of us, because we've internalized those messages of who you are is not enough.
Yeah, yeah. And this one, I didn't really like read this particular one anywhere, but it's something that I've observed throughout my time living in the U.S. And it is, I've come to find out that, for example, people might ask me for like my story, and it's almost like there's this expectation that I have a story. Like, how did you get this far? Is it, I think people are expecting like a rags to riches story or like a hard luck come to success story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like disappointing, I guess. And I'm like, I don't have a story. I've kind of just been middle class my whole life. I don't know what you're looking for. I didn't come from poverty and then go to riches. I just had like a normal life. I went to college and then I just, got a job, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that I think it happens more often for Black people, that people kind of expect that if you're Black and you've reached to a certain place in life, what's your story? How did you get here, in terms of, did you have to defy the odds? Did you face a lot of challenges? Was it tough for you? And like, well, was it tough for you? Like, why is it that you think I have a story, that some kind of special story of how I got here, and that maybe my story is kind of similar to other people? I studied and took a test, and then I got into med school, you know.
Yep.
Or they'll think, oh, you got into school because they were looking for some kind of diversity clause. Oh, that's what it was. Okay. So it was, you got in because they needed a certain percentage of Black people. You know, so it's kind of this disbelief of, maybe I don't have a story. Maybe I got in on merit. You know, I think I've come across those kinds of, I think, microaggressions myself. This sense of, how did you get here? I don't really believe that it could have been easy. It has to have been hard. I think that's something I come across all the time. They think, well, it has to have been difficult. It must have been difficult for you.
Yes, absolutely right. And so I think about how much there is, it's that that experience or the expectation that you are going to somehow be exceptional, or that you got in through some characteristic of yourself and like, oh, well, aren't you just, the lucky one? Which I feel like both of those stories deny the reality of a situation. Because like, first, like, when do we ever expect that from white people? Like, so how did you get into grad school? Are you the first one in your family who's ever been to school? Like, that's never a thing that gets asked or expected. And yet, there are lots of people who are first generation college students of all races, right? Not just of in the community of color and the Black community. And so, like, I wasn't the first person in my family who went to college. I wasn't even the first person in my family who went to grad school. I had like some older cousins who did that. And it was, not this big of a deal, but it was still like an expectation of it's going to happen and you have to figure out how to, make it work. And I think I especially love when people have sort of like the expectations around affirmative action. It's like that somehow you were the only person of color that applied. There were 500 qualified white people that applied. And because they wanted to have quote unquote diversity, they had to pick that one that was you, the
To take
only
the
one
place
who
of, to take
applied,
the place of a qualified.
take the place of those 500 qualified folks. And the reality of that is it's ridiculous. Like, it's complete and total crap. And what I also like to sort of highlight is we don't think enough about in this country how it is about who you know, and it's about the opportunities and the people that you have access to. And so I never went to public school a day in my life because my mother actually did find those affirmative action, scholarships that were available. And so I started at a Catholic school. And here's the thing though, when the private middle school was looking, they went to the elementary school that was Catholic because they're like, these kids are going to know how to survive in this environment. And so you get recruited and you go there. And then high school, they come to your middle school and they recruit you from there. And then college, they come to your high school and they recruit you from there. So my undergraduate degree is from a very small school that literally I'm sure nobody on your camp that is listening to this program has ever heard of. And graduate school, yes, University of Michigan all the way, Wolverine, I say that, I earned that. Woo-hoo. My undergraduate school, literally, like nobody has heard of it. It's a very small liberal arts school out in Illinois, in a suburb of Chicago, a very wealthy suburb of Chicago. I got to that school because they came to my high school to recruit. And then the recruiter was like, we will fly you out for a weekend so you can visit our campus. And then they were like, here are all of these scholarship opportunities that you can apply for. P.S. I wasn't the only person applying for those scholarships, and I wasn't the only Black person, and it wasn't only Black people. There were a variety of people applying for those scholarships. And then I got one, right? And so I talk about sometimes that my school was not a tier one school, which is why nobody like knows the name. It was full of folks who got into tier one schools but didn't have enough money to go there, right? So I got into NYU, I got into Boston University. I just couldn't afford their financial aid was like you want me to be in loans forever. I know I want to be like a social worker. I'm like, no, me go to this other school and get in, and it set me up for other things, right? But would I have ever found that and had those opportunities, I hadn't gone through this whole whole lineage of schools? No, because they're not necessarily going to the local public schools and recruiting from there.
Right.
Why not? Because they don't expect that those people know how to do it. And I say those people, like, those are not our people, right? It's the expectation that, like, I'm going to go to the places where I feel like I know that people are going to be able to handle the work. Well, what makes you believe that? Because of all of the expectations that are around and that exist in that. And so I think that right there is that. And then there's the, like, well, you went to Michigan? How did you get in there? What was that? How your essay must have been wonderful of all of, like, no, it's, I just did the work like everybody else.
Right.
But there's this expectation that you, I think in the Black community, that you somehow have to have been exceptional to get to the place that you are. And there isn't that expectation of exceptionalism from anybody else. But what I also feel like, and this is where when we're making that link to Black mental health, how many of us grew up in the gifted, in the talented programs and had those sort of success, do, produce, show that you're better than everybody else, work harder, stay longer, don't complain, do all of this. And then you make it to whatever success is for you. And it's like, wait, how am I supposed to continue with this? Because I'm used to people looking at me as being in the top. I'm used to thinking of myself in the top. I'm used to having that level of productivity. And now I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to get that, right? Like, there's only so many environments where you can be exceptional in. How about you just live your best life and see what that feels like? But there's this expectation of, like, no, I need to be showing that I'm better than everybody. And I think that for Black people, I think particularly for Black women, it's this idea that, like, I have to show up and be everything to everybody at all times and present while I do it. Yeah. And what is the impact of that on someone's mental health? Because nobody is perfect.
Right. Wow. No, that's so true. That is so true. I think there is definitely the feeling that the environment can create, the system can create, that kind of tells you, hey, you can't take your position for granted. You know, you need to show that you are better than other people to be here. And that's a pressure that sometimes we place on ourselves, but there's a pressure that sometimes we also get that message also from our environment.
Right. And I think collectively that there is that message, right? Work twice as hard to get half the recognition, and that is an accepted standard. That you better show up and be better than everybody, because people aren't gonna, like, see you, value you, appreciate you in that same way. And, like, again, think about what that means for me, because I then have the expectation I can never have a bad day. Because then I'm not showing up, doing twice the amount of work, being better than everybody else to get half the recognition. Again, right? Like, you work twice as much for half as much. And that this is a universal, like, standard that people say as if we should accept this, that this is what you should be striving for. So the expectation is do more for less and be okay with it. Be happy that you just have a seat at the table.
Yeah. Just be happy to be here. You should just be grateful.
Yes, right? Not even just be happy, be grateful, as if your own work didn't get you to that place. And as if you are somehow less worthy than the other people who are at that place and at the table. And so, like, I just think it's amazing how much we don't expect some people to be grateful and others to just be happy with scraps. And, like, how dare you even complain about it? You should be happy with what you have. Like, the microaggression in that you are audacious just for expecting your work and efforts to be recognized. Fair.
Something I've kind of been thinking about, or that I think about from time to time, is this idea of group versus individualism. And I think whenever there is a country, of course, where there's one people group that's dominant, the dominant group gets the benefit of individualism. People think of them as an individual, like you're not representative of the whole group, you're just yourself. But whenever you're in any kind of a minority category, all of a sudden you become representative of a group, you get generalized. So there's this sense that either you're interchangeable with the other Black person in the office, or they kind of have, people find themselves having expectations when you show up by virtue of your race. They kind of have, their brains have categorized many people of that race in this one category. So you show up and they expect you to be a certain way. They expect you to be funny, or they expect you to be entertaining, and sometimes people make kind of fun of these kinds of things too, or they expect you to be good at, like, the boys to be good at basketball. Like, wait, how are you not good at basketball? You're Black, or, that sort of thing,
How do you not dance?
Yeah, how come you don't have rhythm? You're a Black person, and it's kind of, and so, of course, sometimes we make fun of each other that way too. Like, wait a second, Black people are supposed to have rhythm, but it comes down to this idea of group thinking versus individualism, and getting the benefit of being seen as an individual. Like, yeah, I worked here. I got my master's, and I got, this and that, and I'm here because I did the work. And it's not this sense of I'm a credit to my race, or, that sort of thing. It's I'm just a person. And I feel like that gets lost a lot. And I think it leads to a lot of microaggressions of kind of thinking when somebody sees you, they don't see you.
Yes. And I think that, again, when we think about that, the impact of language and the impact of what we're learning and all of these subtle messages that we get, right? Because how many times I will share that, like, you see something on the news and you are like, one, either I know that wasn't a Black person, or like, please don't be a Black person because you're just gonna make us all look bad, right? Like, it's somehow that it is representative of it. But like, how many times do we hear about like lone wolves? And the lone wolves are white men.
Yeah.
But they don't get targeted in a group as that. It's like, oh, we need to understand all of like the nuances of what made them who they are, as opposed to, well, that's just how those people are, right? And so I think it was one of the microaggressions that were listed around sort of criminality, this idea of who are the criminals, but also what makes you a virtuous victim. And we have a very real virtuous victim mentality where it's not just who do we assume are going to be the criminals and who do we assume are going to be the dangerous people, but also if the crime happens to you, what are the characteristics that you need to have in order for your victimization to be seen as valid and deserving of justice? And there is so much that is just in there that we don't even sometimes recognize that is very real for people and is very primal for people. And I think that we don't recognize how we are sometimes socialized into that, right? And so if all the Black people you have ever seen are in gangster movies, then of course you're going to think that they're all drug dealers and pimps and have AKs in the house. If the only time I ever saw white people was when I was seeing the like swamp hunter shows, I would think that was the reality. But unfortunately, the reality is white people have the ability to live in an environment where they have very little, if any, interactions with people, with brown people, with indigenous people, with people of color. Black, indigenous, and people of color do not always have the same like very rarely have the ability to have environments where they are never exposed to white people. And even in the rare cases where that may be, right? Like maybe there's some enclaves where just literally everything is that community. You turn on TV and what do you see?
A lot of representation. Yeah, a lot of
Lots of
representation.
representation, right?
Yeah.
There's so much diversity in how white people can be represented. What about for the rest of us?
Yeah.
Because I remember growing up, right? It was either like you lived in like serious projects, right? It was like the good times. I don't know if you like can get that because you didn't grow up like in America, but like it's the good times, like projects, JJ Walker, thing that happened, or it was the Huxtable,
Oh,
doctor, lawyer, everything, right? Like those were the extremes. Either it was like you were living in the middle of gang central, or you were super upper global. And there was no
middle
like in
class.
the middle. There was
There's no
like
middle, just kind of middle class, just suburban person. Yeah.
right? Like it was very, very rare. And even some of the shows that, I mean, and again, like we could talk about this in general in TV, like how are like waitresses living in these fabulous apartments in like New York
New
City and
York.
stuff.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like, it's this expectation of like what's out there and who's out there and what spaces do people feel comfortable, accepted, seen, heard, validated. And I think that there is so much that goes into this idea of like, what is your place? And the microaggressions are around that. And again, that idea of like, who are the worthy folks and who are the people that need to like be the best, right? Who are the people who you clearly got here on your own merit versus this expectation that you got a handout or a hand up? Who are the people where we're like, when you do something wrong, like, well, that's you personally, I'm wrong with you, versus like, that's how those people are. You can't really, they all are like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so there are all of these expectations, I think, that even come to mind when I see those things, that there's this image of a person that you get. Why? Because you've been socialized to see that person in that particular role.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about what, there was a news story a couple of weeks ago. Two men were returning a TV to, I think it might have been a Best Buy or one of these kinds of electronic stores. They were returning the TV and someone called the police and said that they were stealing a TV. And I'm
Yes.
thinking, how can you be stealing it in that direction? You're bringing it into the store and
Right. You're
you're
the worst boosters ever. Like, just
like I mean, which criminal brings the TV into the store? Um and it just, I think it's the height of like this bias that if you're two black men carrying a TV, then you're suspicious. Even
yeah.
if it's at a store where TVs are purchased, they're sold and returned, it can't possibly be that you paid for it.
Yes.
Um, you know, those are kinds of not so micro aggressions that people face. And as you mentioned, like even the idea of if you're the one who's a victim, your victimhood kind of being validated. So often we have individuals of color who they're often even afraid to report crimes against them because they think when the police arrive, the police is going to implicate them in the crime. So they're like, forget it. People are going to take one look at me and they're going to think I'm the criminal. So why am I even going to report this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and we have evidence of that, right? Like there are stories that we've seen that have come out where it was I'm thinking particularly of a few that I know of where it was like black men who were like disarming someone, right? Who were the people who were trying to help and to diffuse the situation, and they were killed by the police because they were seen as the aggressor, they were seen as the dangerous person. And so really thinking about what does that mean if just some characteristic of yourself that you have no control over is enough for people to deem you frightening, right? Or to deem you threatening. And what is that like for people? For you, how are you internalizing, right? What does that do to your mental health when you are really just trying to live your life and you have to manage all of these expectations, right? You have to think about how threatening am I coming across? How intimidating am I coming across? How scary am I coming across? How worthy am I coming across based on some things that I absolutely have no control or context over?
Yeah, and this kind of this sense of there, I want to say there's often even a feeling of, as you mentioned, there's nothing I can do about it. Like at some level, there creeps in this like hopelessness of it doesn't matter if I try to do everything right. It doesn't matter if the police pull me over and I follow all their instructions. I still am not guaranteed to have justice.
Yes.
Even if I follow the store instructions for how to return something, even if I'm doing everything right, whether I'm quiet, even if I have a peace, even if we have a peaceful protest, we're not destroying anything. We're still not protesting the right way
Yes.
by some people's standards. And so there's, in terms of our mental health, I can see that kind of defeat just eroding who we are as a person. So we have some folks that just leave the country. They're just expats. They're living in another country. They're like, I can't take it anymore. Living in the US is destroying my mental health. And they just move away. And I
Yes.
mean, when you're in a place in your country's kind of racial climate in the year 2021 where people are so oppressed that they're literally just moving to another country, um, there's still a lot of work to be done. Still a lot of work to be done. And so I want to thank you
Absolutely.
so much for coming on the show. I think this was such a great discussion. Again, there's still so much to talk about.
I know. I
I
think we only have like 2 on the list.
It was just I think we only covered like 2 microaggressions. So I think we're gonna probably have to keep talking about this because there's still more. There's definitely more to get to, but I think it's worth like spending the time and talking about it because these are sometimes, especially in the pandemic, like we kind of feel like we're alone with some of these things.
Yes.
And I've heard more than one person kind of talking about having to feel like they have to suit up again in armor to get back into the office or to get back into the daily grind of things because somehow the pandemic gave people a little bit of a break from some of the daily microaggressions. And now we're kind of going back into it full force, going back into those self-doubts. How am I being perceived? How am I being perceived? How am I being, this and that? So we should keep talking about it again. And thank you so much for coming on my first live stream on Facebook.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to talk about, right? Like, as we are still continuing in this pandemic, but people are going back into work, or what it's like for you if you're just like, man, I just need to be around my community, right? I'm missing that connection because I may still be getting some of these microaggressions in other places, and I'm not getting that rejuvenation that comes from being in community with people who understand, who get it, who see me, who validate my existence, right? Who validate what I'm experiencing and let me know that like I'm not just misperceiving situations. Because I think that's a big piece of microaggressions, and the gaslighting that happens is like, well, you're just sensitive.
Yeah. It gets put back on us. Like, just calm down, everybody. Like, I'm just making a joke.
That's not the way they intended it. And so you're actually the problem because you're making everybody uncomfortable with the fact that you're trying to make this a racial thing. You gotta stop pulling the race card. I
Oh
mean,
my gosh. And by the way, I went and I found another Black person who told me I was right. So you're wrong.
clearly,
Clearly you're wrong because I found one other Black person on the other side of the fence that told me I'm right. So we're good.
absolutely.
So, all right, guys. So, for all of you out there that are watching, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have an example of a microaggression that you faced, just drop it in the comments, and we'll probably talk about it next time. Because I know all of us, experience something that someone has said that makes you wonder what are they assuming about me. So. Join me again next Sunday at 1 p.m. We'll be again on Facebook Live, and hopefully I'll have the YouTube Live up and running. And I will see you then.
Sounds
Bye.
great. Bye, everybody.